we just felt this was a perfect fit, perfect game for us to try the technology out.
Talk me through a little bit about the implementation of hand tracking, because A Curious Tale has been available on the Oculus Store since like last November. As it was, Curious Tale is a puzzle game where you have kind of diorama-sized levels that you interact with to find a bunch of hidden pets within the levels, right? And mechanically, it's quite simple already, isn't it?
Yes, so the game was designed to be this perfect introduction to VR. We want to do something that is super easy to get into, remove any obstacles, and just make it super simple for new players in VR, as well as experienced VR players to just jump into a world and have fun, poke around, and interact super simply. So hand tracking for the Curious Tale, given the early days of hand tracking, we just felt this was a perfect fit, perfect game for us to try the technology out with, and to be honest, interacting with your hands in a game such as The Curious Tale of the Stolen Pets is just a perfect fit, because you are using your fingers to poke around, and you're interacting and picking up these tiny items. So we felt that this would be a super good test case for us, but it would also fit the target audience for the game really well, because it would actually be even more accessible to players, removing even more complexity when we're not having to use controllers and just interact with hands. So that is kind of why we are doing this in the first place.
Talk to me about when you started to implement it. Was it something that you got to work on straight away as soon as the kind of beta version of the development kit went out?
We did some initial tests when hand tracking dropped. We were surprised, like everyone else, that the Quest was capable of doing hand tracking. But the very first versions of hand tracking was very unstable. The tracking wasn't that good, but we could immediately see that yes, there is something interesting here. And when the tech becomes more mature, or when we would actually know that Oculus would allow apps to support hand tracking, we said that, well, let's wait for that moment and then add hand tracking. So the actual implementation was done really recently, really just last week, because that's when we kind of got the green light that, hey, hand tracking is about to launch. Are you still interested in supporting hand tracking in Curious Tale? And we just said, yeah, let's do it.
So it hasn't taken much work then to get it running in the game?
Not that much. I mean, again, we have a very nice use case for hand tracking. It's a very simple interaction model to begin with. It's basically just poke and pinch, as I call it. And so from that end, adding hand tracking was quite easy. I mean, doing those two interactions isn't really hard. What we've been spending the most amount of time on is really handling all the edge cases when tracking is not super solid. But this is our first iteration. We are still learning. We have been doing quite a few experiments with more complex hand tracking, like really dynamic hand poses and things. But again, the model that we chose for the Curious Tale, I think that's a really good fit for the game and a perfect start for us.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's such a leap for some audiences to just be able to remove the controller, like you were saying earlier, right? I can think of tens of people now that I would be much more comfortable showing the game to, because I don't need to teach them the inner workings of a controller. Because to me and you as gamers, buttons and analog sticks are perfectly everyday items that we're very used to using. But for a lot of people, right, the big thing about hand tracking here is that everything is going to become so much more intuitive to them.
Yes, and as we don't have any virtual locomotion in the game, I mean, you are actually there. You can walk around these tiny worlds and interact with them. That really removes one of the biggest things. Like with controllers, you have all these options with buttons and sticks, and you can move around and do things that with only hands you really just have to rely on your hand poses. And that was what actually one of the most trickier things. It's like when do you intend to grip something, and when are you just kind of relaxing your hands and accidentally forming a grip pose with your hands, which is why you sometimes can feel that, hey, I was trying to do this and nothing happened. Well, it's actually because you're doing grip with your other hand without thinking about it. So that is very convenient and nice with controllers, because you have these physical buttons that you manually press, and we know, like, well, now you're trying to do this. As with hand tracking, we have to make assumptions which are not always correct. So again, I think for the Curious Tail, it works out pretty okay in most cases. We do have one interaction that is kind of not hard to do, but it's the most challenging one, and that is rotating the world, because it's so easy to just relax your other hand and actually grab the world, which prevents you from rotating it. So it's one of those things where we are thinking about, should we maybe for the hand tracking use case just change the mechanic and do something else.
So to move the world in the game with the hand tracking, is it literally you just have to put your hand on the world and spin it, or do you need to do the grabbing motion too?
You do the pinch and grab motion, and
right,
just like you do with a controller, you grab in thin air and then you rotate. And we do the same with hand tracking, but you pinch grip instead.
That's really interesting, because I'd kind of assumed, I guess wrongly, that when hand tracking was going to be shared out to developers, kind of the standards for what was a grip animation would already be there. But it sounds like you guys are really working that all out from scratch again.
Yeah, I mean, you do get some things from the SDK, such as knowing whether you are pinching with any of your fingers, like actually moving your tip of your index finger to the tip of your thumb, for instance. But what we do is, I guess that is one way of doing it. But again, when you, as you turn your hand around, you will lose tracking of, because the cameras won't see your fingers from all ends, and it will try to estimate and do assumptions, and those might not always be right. So even if you have solid tracking, your fingers can start moving, and you would drop items because the pinch is no longer valid. So we have been doing quite a lot of mechanics in looking at your grip and tracking quality over time. And if you are interacting with something, we are more reluctant to letting go than if you are about to grip something. So there's quite a lot of code that we did just to make sure that once you have gripped an item, it will stay gripped until you actually clearly release it. So again, it's not perfect. If you are in a environment where you have super good tracking, it works really well. But as lighting conditions change, or you move your hands outside of the tracked space, it's easy to drop things. And we think that with the implementation we have now, that most people will have a pretty solid experience.
Is that something that, I mean, you guys effectively have a head start on this compared to a lot of developers on the official Quest store. Is that something that you'll look at sharing over time, that kind of knowledge?
Yes, the plan is to write a blog post about what we did and how we ended up where we are. So definitely, I mean, that's one of the things that I like about the VR industry, is that we're all very open and sharing and caring.
How do you handle more traditional elements in the game, like the menu, for example? Because summoning that, there's not a button to summon with anymore.
No, but just as with controllers, I mean, in the original game, you don't have hands. You have these small spheres that you point with, and for menus and other thing, you just point with your index finger, and you kind of touch the menu items and interact that way. And that is also a very natural and intuitive way of doing things. You know, you extend your finger and you touch them, and that's what you would do. So again, you know, that was a great fit for us.
Yeah, I'm really interested about, you know, the future of this technology. Obviously, you've got this implemented into this game that was a really perfect fit for it, and in quite an extraordinary way, quite an extraordinary coincidence that they came about at the same time, really. But then on the other side of what you guys have is Apex Construct, right? And we were talking earlier that yes, like Curious Tail works so well because you stand still, you just have to use your hands. But I'm curious to know if you have tried any experiments with what you have with Apex Construct in both the action and locomotion, if you have any ideas in that space.
We haven't tried as in making Apex run with hand tracking. We have done experiment with more complex interaction models. No, it's been mostly focusing, well, so far we've been mostly focusing on the interaction model, how you know pick things up, etc. So we do have some thoughts around that, how that could actually work. I mean, it's not that different from adding support, you know, proper support for knuckles, for instance, where you actually have individual finger tracking as well. Even though you do have the benefit of, you know, buttons and things on those controllers. I guess the biggest issue we have is how to move around. We know that Alden is doing interesting experiments with, you know, come see, and then they put out the teleportation beam. That could definitely be one way of doing it. But then again, I guess for us right now, I mean, hand tracking is super interesting and it's something that we will keep looking at. I'm still a bit like, will people pick it up? Would they prefer to play our games such as Apex Construct, you know, with hands only, or would they be missing out on some of the things that you don't get with hand tracking? A very big part that you miss is haptic feedback, for instance, which we use quite a lot in Apex, and we've been adding some more recently. But being able to feel when you interact and, you know, when you pull the bow, etc. With hand tracking, you don't have that currently. So again, you know, hand tracking for Curious Tail was a way to improve the immersion, improve the feeling of presence of being there. And I'm not sure hand tracking in Apex would do that. But it is interesting for sure. You know, how would it feel shooting your bow and arrow just by holding your hands and doing this? It would be fun to test, because I guess you would use your fingers. I can't do that with a controller. Like letting go of the string, etc. So yeah, it is fun to think about. I mean, I think we would like to wait and see whether hand tracking picks up. If players, you know, was like, wow, this would be really cool or really good to play the game with hands only, then that could be something that makes us actually do it. But right now it's Curious Tail, and we will, you know, try and improve that game first, and then we'll see.
Yeah, I mean it is really interesting. I think it does that's a question a lot of different people making a lot of different types of content are going to have to look at going forward, right? For you guys, you know, you are very like core gamer based with the stuff you make. You make Apex Construct and Budget Cuts, and you're right, those don't seem immediately compatible with hand tracking. But then, you know, there are other elements like the VR film industry, as big as that is right now, that could really, really benefit from this technology much closer in a much closer term, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. I mean, there are certain elements of Apex would really benefit from hand tracking. Like, you know, the infamous terminals that we have that you can type commands on.
Yes,
Actually
that'd be
be
fun.
a really good fit. But we've solved that with the touch bar and stuff, so we're fun. But yeah, there are so many interactions that just become supernatural in VR when you have your proper hands. But I mean, again, this is something that I will talk about in the blog post. Adding hand tracking to a game is more than just making, you know, a virtual hand animate according to how your physical hand behaves. It's more about how do you know what the user is really trying to do, what is
Mm.
the intention, and how do you communicate, and other things. So it can sound easy at first, but then as you start implementing and testing, you realize that, oh, it's actually a very complex subject.
Mm.
But when you find something that works, it's super rewarding. So again, I think for the most part, I really believe and think that the Q's Tale became a better game with hand tracking.
Awesome. Cool. Well, yeah, thanks for being here. We really look forward to trying that out. Yeah, and we'll see you next time. Make sure to comment, like, and subscribe if you see the video.